Okay, there. So we can move to last but not least, uh, our third topic of tonight, and that is camera flying. And Casey, we are all ears.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it for all of you that have hung in here for this long. I'd like to just start by saying I'm by no means a professional camera flyer. I'm relying heavily on this presentation from a lot of information from a lot of other people that are, and they graciously agreed to allow me to share some of their pictures and content. And this I was told to be a 30-minute presentation, so that just barely scratches the surface on camera flying. I'm happy to talk to anybody or answer questions later or at the drop zone if you have any questions about camera flying, but hopefully I'll give you some good introduction safety tips on here. So this is a great starting slide. What could possibly go wrong flying a camera? And before you all say anything and grill me, I know that that's a paraglider in the picture on the right. But it's a great picture nonetheless to show, even with a small GoPro, the kind of problems you can have in any type of event with a parachute or lines above you. The picture in the middle was created by a good friend of mine named Casey Pruett. He is a professional photographer in Emporia Bravo. He created this infographic to kind of help promote safety. And I'll leave that picture up for a little while you try and look and see if you can find all the things wrong. It basically asks, if you can't read, it says, can you spot all the mistakes? Rachel has 50 jumps and has asked you for a gear check in the boarding area. So obviously there's a lot going on here. Some things obvious, some things not so obvious, but I'll also let you answer if you have any questions about that at the end. But obviously having a camera on your head, and mostly I'll be talking about cameras mounted on helmets, that can cause a big problem. Even if it's a small GoPro, you see in the picture on the right, the paraglider with the line entanglement. You see the picture on the left, an AFF instructor with a student who's just pitched their pilot chute into their GoPro. And obviously that's going to be a problem. So there's a lot to think about when you're going to fly a camera. It's not just simply putting that Gorilla Tape on top of your helmet and slapping a GoPro on there and thinking that you're good. From my understanding and trying to dig through a lot of the regulations, this is just a brief overview of the main requirements within Skydive Flanders for what it takes to have a camera with you on a jump. You definitely need to have a safety briefing. You need to have clearance from the DZ safety officer. Only tandem instructors can use hand cams in accordance with the regulations after they've received that training and certification. You need to definitely have a C license, at least from a recognized organization. Make sure you absolutely have an audible altimeter that's functioning, set to the correct height for your DZ level. It's mounted and clearly hearable throughout the entire jump. And if you're going to jump with AFF in tandem, you do need to have a D license. If any of that information is incorrect, I apologize, but that was the best I could find in the different regulations I was looking through. If we start talking about how camera flying started, there's always been a fascination with trying to get pictures in free fall. Initially, people were taking them out of a plane or mounting a camera to the plane wing or the body of the plane. And people would even start trying to take handheld cameras with them. It was in 1957 that I could find them, and the first person in France was trying to put batteries on one side of the helmet and a camera on the other side of the helmet to balance it out. But this person in this picture is Carl Banish. And Carl Banish was one of the first people to really actively look at in-flight photography. And he created a bunch of films, and he was very influential in the beginning, promoting a lot of skydiving. He was involved in many of the initial TV shows and movies that featured skydiving. There's a great film I can recommend called Sunshine Superman that came out in 2014. It's a somewhat of a documentary about his life, and it's very interesting. And he was definitely one of the first people to start this whole idea. Jumping right into it. Obviously, like I said, the focus will be more on camera mounted helmets in this presentation. And so when you think about a helmet that you're going to use, the fit is probably one of the most important things. You need to definitely have a helmet that fits you properly, is a very snug, tight fit. Foam can decrease and change properties over time and at different altitudes and temperature and humidity levels. So you might have a different fitting helmet depending on what time of day it is or what altitude you're at or where you're jumping. You want to make sure that the helmet is somewhat square in shape if possible, with nothing protruding. You want to make sure that it's light, has a chin cup if it's an open face helmet with a cutaway system. And if it's a full face, it also needs to have a cutaway system. And very importantly, you should absolutely check that cutaway system to make sure it works at least once a year. I know a lot of people that just put a cutaway system on and think they're good, but they've never actually even tried it. And this is something that you should definitely do, and do it with someone pulling on your helmet a little bit up so that you feel some tension on the helmet, which would be similar to some type of problem you could have in a jump, and make sure that you can activate that cutaway system and get that helmet off your head. You absolutely must have an audible altimeter in your helmet. I recommend 2. That's always better to have backup. I know that's also a free flying recommendation, which I think is a fantastic one. And then you need to be careful if you're going to have other types of indicators, whether it's a light system to give you an indication if your camera is on or not. You need to make sure you have all of that accounted for inside the helmet when you're preparing that. When you're mounting the camera, it's also extremely important to try and have the camera as best as possible on the balance point on the top of your head, and as central as possible so that it does not protrude to the side. Obviously, you want to really minimize snag hazards and make sure that you reduce every opportunity for a line or a riser to get snagged, or a pilot chute to get snagged on something. And so there's definitely a lot you have to consider when you try and make these as snag free as possible. You also want to make sure that the mounts themselves are very secure, but at the same time that they can break away under tension. This seems somewhat counterintuitive, but if you for any reason cannot activate the cutaway system on your helmet, it's much better to lose the camera and deal with the consequences after that than have a problem where you cannot get out of a line snag or something that's entangled with you. So make sure that you have, I know that 3D printed mounts are becoming very popular now. And that's also a great advancement in making these mounts more snag or less snag likely, which is great. But make sure that the materials that are being used also can break if under the right amount of tension, to make sure that you can get out of something. Setting up the attachment or the alignment of the camera is also very important, and that could be a whole nother presentation itself. There's obviously other types of attachments you can use: chest mounts, foot mounts, hand mounts, etc. So there's a lot of different considerations when these different type of mounts are used to make sure that you are keeping them as snag-free as possible. And obviously a ring sight is a very handy tool to use to help you frame the shot. Once you've got a camera aligned, and if you're using a different type of a jump, for example, and you're not familiar with it and you don't know automatically where to put your head to get the shot, a ring sight is very helpful. But a ring sight is obviously a very big snag hazard, and is something that really should only be done if under some professional guidance for installing that. When you're thinking about the clothes to wear when you're going to do a camera jump, dressing for success is the same answer for every other type of jump as well. Obviously, you want to, if possible, have some wings involved if you're trying to have some range, because you will have some extra weight and different center of balance in your jump. Wings can be very helpful, and there's different types of materials, obviously, that can affect you in a falling rate of faster or slower. You can also attach the wings in different locations, hopefully on the jacket or rig. Some wings are set up for belly flying. Some are set up for back flying or free flying, not really free flying, but more on your back. These can all be very helpful, but they also can be hard on your shoulders if you have the camera wings not attached correctly or in the right location. So make sure you talk to people that are familiar with this and understand what type of jumping you intend to do if you're going to get wings. But they can be hard on your shoulder. And it's also very important, if you can, to get wings that can detach so that you can connect them to either the rig or pants. I think on this picture here, if you can see, there's one of these RSL type buckles here, and that has been disconnected so that the person has more range under Canopy to be able to grab toggles, risers, etc. But also, when you have this type of detachable connection point, it's very important that you, one, make sure that this wing is outside of the main web lift when you're putting on your rig, and that you don't want to throw your pilot chute through any kind of connection that you have here. And I know that sounds unlikely, but like that first presentation from Mason with someone putting a GoPro through a D-ring, I have seen these things happen. Booties are probably not necessary for camera jumps. The only exception I can think to that is if you're filming formation skydiving and you might come off the plane a bit early and you need to track up the hill a bit to try and get to the group. That's about the only time booties are really going to be helpful in camera jumps. Usually with wings, you're going to have more than enough range to get to where you need to be. And hopefully you're not doing a lot of movement in the jump either. Unless you're doing some free fly jumping, then that's a different story. But obviously you don't want to have booties in a free fly jump. When you're talking about the rig, it's obviously very important to make sure it's a very good tight fit. It's been hopefully made for you and customized to your body so that you have a very good close connection to the rig with your body. You want to make sure the chest strap is nice and tight, but not so tight that it will cause the risers to snap into your head on opening. And you want to be sure that you have all the latest good safety measures in place with a free fly PUD handle, hopefully in your pilot chute. You would probably want to consider having a little bit larger reserve if you're going to be jumping a lot of cameras, since you'll be having a little bit more weight and potential problems. So potentially a larger reserve is going to be helpful for you and a good idea. I highly recommend a sky hook, as they've really been shown to help increase the speed of deployment of a reserve, which will always give you more time. And that's always a good thing. AADs are compulsory. Obviously, that should be a no-brainer. And a very tricky, or a very one that's not as common, but I have seen it happen, is that make sure your brake lines are stowed properly when you pack, because unstowed brake lines can come out and they can get snagged on cameras. They could also cause a toggle fire, which can cause you to have some malfunctions that you don't want. And so there's a lot going on there, and to make sure you do a really nice pack job and to keep those brake lines stowed is a really good, important thing that sometimes is easy to overlook. With a canopy selection, I highly recommend a more docile 7-cell canopy. I know that that's not as popular with people these days. They like to have more fun on the canopy ride, which I totally understand. But if you're going into this a bit more professionally, initially to start with, you would hopefully want to have a more docile 7-cell, something that's not semi-elliptical. Hopefully you have very good packing under your skill set, and you're having on-heading openings regularly so that you don't have to mess with any type of potential line twists or malfunction from that. The last thing you want is any kind of quick jerk motion or a fast turn when you're opening, because you've got this extra weight on your head. So obviously a bigger slider is also a good consideration to help slow down your openings a little bit. And you want to make sure that what you have open, that you really keep your head on a swivel, because you need to be aware of everything that's going on around you. Make sure that you know where everybody is, hopefully. You can count canopies, make sure that you see the same number of canopies as there were people in the load, and make sure that you have a nice, stable, consistent flying pattern, and especially for your landing. When you are landing, you might want to consider initially that you have some extra weight and a different center of balance than before when you had no camera on your hand. And another thing to consider with the canopy selection is you might want to consider having a longer bridle, not necessarily a larger pilot chute, but a longer bridle will definitely help you to clear out the way of any type of burble that you create, especially if you have wings. It's not the same size as a wingsuit, but obviously you can create a little bit more of a burble with more surface area. And so you might want to consider having a longer bridle to help get that pilot chute out of the way of your openings into clean air. Altimeters are obviously always necessary and a great idea. You want to make sure you have those. But with visual, it's not always easy to see your altimeter if you're trying to keep focus on the formation or the group or the people that you're trying to film. And so a good alternative is having glove mounted or wrist mounted visual altimeters. I also like using a mud flap mounted altimeter in a big analog style. That's very easy for me to look with my eyes and not my head and glance down so that I can see that very visually, very quickly, understand what altitude I'm at. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, it's very important and a must that you have an audible altimeter, at least one inside your helmet, so that you can be aware of your altitude at all times. That's obviously a good safety tip for any jump. When you're in the plane and you're a cameraman, you can obviously be wind up sitting in any different location, but a lot of times you'll find yourself being the last person to board the plane because you're going to be the first person to get out. So you're going to have some duties at the door. You want to make sure that you are still very consistent with your seatbelts. Make sure that you are very conscious of everyone else in the plane. You want to look after your other skydivers. If you're flying a camera, that means that you do have a little bit more experience than beginners. So be courteous and think and look after your fellow jumpers. Do gear checks visually. Make sure that you are trying to help other people. And obviously, you might have a little bit more going on that you need to prepare for the jump. So do try and keep good plane etiquette. Try not to move very much in the plane. Try and keep all of your body motions compact and inside where your space is. And be aware that if you've got a helmet, you're taking it on and off. You could hit other people. You could scrape other people's gear. So it's obviously very important. You need to have a lot more consideration for others when you've got big cameras on your head and you're taking up a little bit more space. And of course, always make sure you do your gear check on yourself. And I would recommend turning your cameras on initially when you first start flying cameras at around 10,000 feet so that you have them ready to go. And you're not fiddling with them on jump run, which is never a good idea. You should definitely have already been ready and done yourself a gear check and be ready long before that. And then repeat this many times. Get used to this. Find your routine, find what works for you, and then follow that routine. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you what happens when I didn't follow my own routine, which is definitely possible for all of us. Obviously, there are a large number of types of jumps that you can do. This is just a sampling of all the different types of jumps that you could be doing in camera jump, and each one of these has their own unique requirements, considerations, safety points, things to prepare for. And so we could go on this. I've taken camera courses that have gone on for 3 days, talking about all these different types of jumps and how to prepare for them. So I'm happy to talk more about any of these with anybody that's got interest in them, but just as a interest of time, I'll continue on here. When you're going to go into the actual jump itself, I highly recommend that before you've gotten into the plane, you've practiced on a mock-up, the exit. You've climbed out of the mock-up, you understand the extra mass that you have on your head and how to get out. With your rig, just like with any other jump, you want to keep the back of your rig to the center of the door as you exit. It's very important that you also try and make sure that your helmet is the last part of you that goes out of the plane. If you start looking out of the plane with your helmet, then you might catch a little bit more wind and air than you're used to, and it could really cause some problems. So at the beginning, make sure that you're very conscious when you climb out. Keep your body as low as possible. Keep tight to the plane when you're outside. You want to keep your center of gravity as low as possible. You don't want to be standing up and looking over the top of the plane, for example, because again, you can catch some wind with that extra mass on the top of your head. There's obviously different types of exits. You can have a passive exit where you just let go and fall with the group. An active exit might have you trying to press into a position or jump into a slot. And that takes a little bit more practice because you've got, again, this extra mass, and that's a lot to consider. So I recommend that you just take a lot of time to practice the passive exits and make sure you understand how this different configuration and center of mass affects your exit. And it's always a good idea to, if you're in a formation group or a bigger group, that you let those front floaters go out first to try and block the wind for you. They're usually strong people and they're in front float for a reason. So let them do that extra work for you and block some of that wind. And of course, be sure and breathe. Make sure that you're taking some time and being calm when you exit. If you forget to breathe or you forget to put the activation device, the shutter activation device in your mouth, then that might be a problem if you don't get the shot. So take your time, breathe, and enjoy the ride. Now, what's very important during the jump itself is to remember why we are there as camera flyers, and that is to record the jump for others. We're there to try and make sure that we have a great representation, a memory of the jump, or a verification of the jump for a record, for example, a tandem jump for a customer, an AFF jump for someone that wants to show their friends and family. So you're there to help others. The jump is about them. It's not about you. And so keep that in mind, that you're there to not interfere. You're to be a shadow to that group or those people that are jumping. You want to be as smooth as possible in your flying. You want to try and make sure that you're not in any of their way in any type of activities that they're going to do. If they're going to be flying some dynamic or angle or tracking, you want to make sure that you're not in the path that they're going. You want to try and understand what the jump plan was beforehand. You want to make sure you run through the dirt dive with them. You understand what the pull altitudes are, what the breakoffs are. You want to make sure that you keep total awareness of the jump. And that's really important also in case if someone goes high or low in the jump. You might see it and others may not. So you can always help people understand that there's someone high or low by giving them a point or making sure that they try and understand that there's someone up or down. So keep that kind of whole awareness in your mind when you're doing the jump, and make sure that you protect yourself at all times. It's really important to just keep everything aware and have that full jump plan in your mind, and then always have a plan B. It's always important in any jump to have a plan B, but especially if you're a camera flyer, because you're adding an extra dimension to the group that's already focusing on whatever they're trying to achieve in their jump. During breakoff, again, that awareness of what the jump is very important. You want to make sure that you know what the plan is. You want to know what the breakoffs are. You want to know where you're supposed to be at the time of pull. You want to practice a very good barrel roll. It's pretty important to do a good barrel roll on any jump you're flying a camera to make sure that there's clear airspace around you, because typically you will often be pulling in place as a camera person. Or you might be, going to a specific location of the jump or the formation itself in order to get a specific piece of that or to understand the breakoff for later debriefs. So it's really important that you understand what the pull order is. You check with other jumpers. You also, if there's going to be multiple camera flyers on a jump, you understand who's going to pull when and where. So again, it's very important. You are one of the few people that have a big overview of the entire jump. And so take responsibility for that position that you have and make sure that you protect yourself at all times. Obviously, when you're jumping with cameras, hopefully no one is doing anything crazy like Tom Sanders here in these photos to start with. But once you do start putting some heavier items on top of your head, it's very important that you do try and slow down a little bit. Obviously, you can do that through de-arching, the classic grab a beach ball type pose, or try and use your wings a little bit to slow your vertical descent. Also, you can always track for a couple of seconds in a safe direction and then flare to give yourself a little bit of a decrease in your vertical velocity, because you are creating a burble with all that mass on top of your head, as well as if you have wings. So you need to be conscious of that, and that's why I suggest having a little bit longer bridle. But obviously, making sure that you have clean air behind you is a really nice way to make sure you have a good clean opening. If you are using wings, it's probably an important idea to also think about using a symmetrical pull technique, very similar to what is taught in wingsuiting. And that just means that you simply, instead of reaching with one hand and pushing the other hand in front of your head, that you reach back with both hands in a symmetrical manner, throw both hands out to the side as you pull the pilot chute and throw it with your right hand if you have the right side pull out. And this way, it helps you to stay symmetrical to avoid any type of potential line twist through asymmetry body position. And maybe the wings that you're wearing don't allow you to do a normal type pull. So you might need to consider learning this symmetrical pull technique. When you do pull, it's really important. If you have cameras on your head, you're going to start having a lot of extra mass up there, and you don't want to encourage any of that mass being in the way of your risers coming and your lines coming out as you start to open. So keep your eyes on the horizon. You can even start to sit just a little tiny bit into your harness, because that'll help get your neck and your head in alignment with your spine and the vertical pull. That does sound a little counterintuitive, because I just told you to keep your camera out of the lines in the riser area. But this is more for when you start having big, serious camera equipment on top of your head, that you might need to do some techniques to help protect your neck and avoid any type of risers or line interaction during the opening. And then obviously try and visually scan and look for everybody that you can see, and make sure that you know where everyone is. So if you have any type of emergency procedures, the typical one is always going to be a snag entanglement with your cameras. And the general recommendation is that you just try to clear that entanglement one time if you have enough altitude. And if you cannot clear the entanglement with one attempt, then you do need to get rid of that helmet or get rid of the whatever is causing the entanglement and get yourself clear so that you can have the chance for a main that clearly opens. And if not, you'll have to go to your reserve. If after you've opened, you start to have problems, then you need to go through your emergency procedures. And this flow chart from Instructors Academy is available online. I think it's a really good one to help as a reminder to help you remember the procedures and what the different type of malfunctions can be and what the right procedure is to go through those emergency procedures. So I highly recommend having a plan about your emergency procedures and knowing what you need to do. Because a camera can add to the complications very quickly if you start having things caught in things that you can't see and you don't know how to clear them out yourself. Okay, so here's the mea culpa moment. This is a jump I was filming. This is from my perspective, and hopefully we'll get some video here. You see a nice wingsuit group having a fun, good jump. And this is all going pretty well. I apologize if the video is a little bit shaky. Apparently it's not rendering as fast as I'd hoped. But what you're going to see here is as we're making a turn and we start to go into that turn, and I'm going to transition from my back to my belly, is when I realize that I had forgot to buckle the chin cup on my helmet. And at this point, right about now, when I realize that, and I start to see things spinning around, I go onto my back to try and pull the helmet back onto my head, because the only thing that's keeping that helmet at the moment is the blow tube that's in my mouth and the pins connecting that into the power or the mechanical transducer in the helmet. So these scenes here of me on my back flying, trying to get that helmet back onto my head. And then at this point, the helmet has come off and it starts spinning. And the inevitable conclusion here, you're just going to see black as it eventually hits the ground. So we can skip to that. And I can just show you that thanks to Matt Scossler, the next day, he helped me find the helmet, what was left of it. Amazingly enough, the GoPros still work. The DSLR camera did not. The helmet took a beating, and that was definitely my fault. And I was very lucky that this fell into a dirt field. It didn't fall into any area that caused any damage, any personal liability that I would have been responsible for, since it was the camera on my helmet, on my head. But this obviously was a very good reminder. And I can only attribute this happening to being distracted when I was getting geared up in the plane before we went out. And I did not remember my routine, and I did not restart it when I was distracted and go back and verify that everything was ready to go. So I thought that the chin cup broke initially, but when we looked at the video afterwards, it was very clearly visible in the pictures of me inside the plane that I did not have my chin cup closed and attached properly. So that was definitely my fault, and something that I learned a lesson the hard way, in an expensive way. But being safe is very important with camera. Obviously, having a great camera or a video camera is great to record jumps and relive the memories and have a good laugh with your friends and show stuff to your family and friends about the cool things that we do in our jumps. But obviously, there's also a lot of responsibility that you need to think about. And I'm happy to help answer any questions and help teach anybody to fly a camera safely. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
There's one question in the chat, Casey, from Nick. He wants to know, is there any data available about the forces that the break-off items on your helmet should break?
There are, and I would have to look them up. I don't have those off the top of my head. But I can, if that was Nick, I can get those to you, Nick.
Okay, and then Gerrit also posted in the chat the link to the fact that audibles are mandatory for camera jumps in our regulations.
Yeah.
They were on the markdown.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, audible altimeters are very important and even more so for camera jumps.
Okay, Casey, thanks a lot for the presentation.